Hey guys, welcome back to Chris and Retro. Tonight I'm going to continue the story about abuse in treatment facilities, fraudulent behavior, and mistreatment of patients. I've been doing a lot of research over the last since I started this series here, and it wasn't really designed to be a series, just going to be an ongoing conversation. But as I've talked to a few people that have been chasing this type of thing for a while, and including lawsuits and terrible mistreatment of people. My primary focus of this show, this video, and what I've been talking about has really been a specific nonprofit. But then as I dug into this and started getting comments on the channel and some things that the people have reached out to me, wow, it's a pretty heavy conversation, and there's some pretty intense stuff going on with this. And I've been really given some great advice, and I'm definitely implementing some of the advice that was given. But the purpose of tonight's video is to help you prior to finding yourself in these circumstances, and hopefully offer some sense of preparation so that there's more accountability around what's going on. And so in this video, may not be as long as the other ones, but I'll give you some things I've learned already, and hopefully this is something to help you avoid some of the challenges that I've run into. And had I known what I know now, I would have implemented every single thing that I'm sharing with you. So with that, we'll get started. So I don't know if you get, I'm sure you have. I actually saw a funny meme today, and I'm sure you'll be able to relate to this. I think everybody does. I saw a funny meme. It basically said that a hacker called and said they had all the person's passwords, and the response was, "Great, let me get a pen and paper. I want to write them down." You know, we all forget our passwords. We don't know how to get into our systems and find all the information we need that's on those systems. And so what do? Well, we forgot your password. You click that button, you start going through all this stuff about forgot your password. Well, a lot of times those forgot your passwords don't help either, especially if you've had something for a while, because you don't remember the email you used. You don't remember your previous password, obviously, if that's asked. But, you know, depending on the questions, and some of them, you might not even remember some of the prompt questions that you had. So depending on how long this password has been out there, this application or email or whatever else it is that you're trying to get into, forgetting your password can be a big deal, and you can't get to the information you're looking for. Kind of feels like that actually when you're dealing with situations like I've been talking about a few shows here in a row relative to mistreatment of our loved ones. And you know, getting the information can often be very difficult. It's almost as if you didn't know your password and you got to figure out what it is. So the first thing you're doing is going through this whole rigor to figure out what the password even is, to try to get in and find out the information you need. So there's ways to get ahead of that before you even find yourself in the circumstances that I'm in right now with Sam and apparently many others, is the responses I'm getting from the show, and an individual I spoke with tonight that was incredibly informative and amazing support. And so I'll try to pass along some of the things that I thought were practical in a general sense. I will not be getting into much specifics anymore about specifics about what I'm going to apply for my situation, but at least I'll give you the general thoughts that came across and some cautionary things that might help, as well as some of the things that I've found for me that I would have done differently had we gotten ahead of time, you know, to deal with the circumstance. You know, what at the basics of substance use treatment and mental health treatment is the fact that these are non-medical facilities performing medical work. That's a very key distinction. So a hospital being a medical facility or dentist office, whatever. But if you go to a treatment facility, they're doing medical type work, but they're not really a medical facility. And so with that comes a whole lot of other things. Now in New York State, in many cases, you've got facilities that are licensed under two organizations. So you have the Office of Mental Health, OMH, and then you have OASIS, which is the one for substance use disorder. Those are both state organizations. And in many cases, if you have it, the way that treatment is moved into and how treatment works, most people are coming in with both sides of that being treated. However, in New York State, they're two completely different organizations and require two different views on treatment. So I find that there are two different regulations and certifications and all that other stuff to actually have that work. In fact, if you're going to work on mental health diagnosis outside of substance use disorder, I believe it's a completely set of different it's a different set of certifications or licensing to actually be able to do those things. It's costly for the worker. It's time consuming to make sure you're doing it right. There's a lot of nuance with it. So doing it right is challenging. but being egregiously lazy about things is avoidable. And so, as I said in a previous show, we all make mistakes, and this is not about mistakes, and it's certainly not about enabling a client that is trying to manipulate what they know to be true about other fraudulent cases. And with that, I think some of the tips I give you will help you work through that as well, to make sure that your loved one is not just hustling you, but at the same time, there actually is a circumstance where if they need advocacy, you can understand, whether this is just the stage of their addiction or if they really need the help. And so I think in many cases, you'll find that, as we've seen statistically, as I shared in the last show, there are many cases of this that's out there that is valid, and we should find ways to support our loved ones the best we can. So how do you find your password when you hit the forgot the password? Well, a lot of it starts with questions. And so one of the things you have to do is really go on a fact-finding mission at first. I think what we can easily do is, many of us, especially if it's our loved one that's in there, we probably have gone through a protracted season or several protracted seasons and ups and downs of their addiction. So we may not necessarily be trusting their word at that point. And that's just the way it is. They probably have had lied, manipulated because the drug is calling them so hard. It's not really about your interpersonal relationship with them in so much it is that, whatever brought them to their substance use is the predominant driving force in their life. And with that, they've got to do anything they can to get it, including hurt those around them. And even though hurting those around them is not the intent, it's just that's how it works out. But one of the things that you can do to get started is that make sure that if when you're going in to the program, or you're going into a season sobriety, come to some kind of verbal agreement with your loved one to understand how it is that accountability is going to be measured. I think one of the things that can be viewed at is that you're being a parole officer, some kind of a regulatory body on top of that, and that can only hurt relationships. So I'm not suggesting you go that far, but I think that if you can talk to your loved one and recognize that what we're trying to do is just really make sure we kind of have a GPS of what's going on in their life, so that they have accountability from a safety standpoint, and also you have knowledge of what's going on so that you can support them when they go forward. And a few things that we've agreed to, at least, is, Sam has a GPS on her phone. I do too. We keep track of each other that way. And it's not because why are you there or why are you here? But we just understand addiction, and addiction can take you down bad roads. So if the GPS goes, it's not so much even about whether the GPS shows where they're going. It's that if it goes off, it's turned off, something's being hidden, because in a better state, we've agreed that works. Another thing is to make sure that you know their appointments. So, this also is a corroborating evidence. While all this stuff I'm sharing with you is going to seem very stalkerish, but for the specific issue of malpractice and that type of thing, and keeping your loved one accountable in a way that helps support them so that you have evidence when people are accusing them of other things, these are things that are useful. And so the appointment thing, the method we've done is that, she'll have an appointment, a treatment provider appointment or a doctor's appointment, or whatever, and we have Google calendars. So she'll invite me to the meeting. Now, I don't go to them most times. Sometimes I do if she wants me to, but I don't go to them. But what it does, it puts on my calendar letting me know that she's going to be at that facility. So what we're essentially doing is creating our own treatment chart, and that we understand where everything, when she's supposed to be there. And then the corroborating evidence is that she was there because of the GPS. So when you find yourself in a bad situation and somebody says they're not showing up for their appointments, you've got it. They can't say that, because you actually have a digital timestamp and the promise that was made, and the fact that they kept it through those two devices. Being empathetic too as they're going through this, I think a lot of times keeps people focused on the goals. There's a tough balance, really, between reality. Sorry, I've been a long couple days, been exhausted. I think I yawned in the last one too. I don't know what that's all about. I haven't had that problem before. But there's a tough balance between being empathetic and making sure your loved one is grounded in reality of what they're facing, and what the circumstances are. So on your side, as the person that's the support system at home or wherever you are, there are going to have to be things that you're managing as well. So the last thing you need is a treatment provider playing games that now you got to go back through and be a PO, so to speak, for them. Instead, what you're trying to do is offer support for your loved one, at the same time hold certain levels of accountability so that you know what's going on should you ever have to defend that person's position as they go, maybe find themselves in a bad way in a treatment facility. Now, we've shared that these things are, in our case, it's happening. shockingly. It's one more thing. We're like, man, what else is going to happen? And now this, you got to be kidding me, but it's happening. And the biggest thing is, one big thing is to know your rights. So going in, know your rights, know what it is that you're entitled to or not entitled to. You understand how you set up, you understand what the treatment plan is, be crystal clear about what it is, and don't forget it. Get a copy of it right out of the gate. Have the consent signed. A lot of facilities will have you sign consents, but they also weasel a lot of them at times with expirations and say you don't have one or this or that or whatever. Make sure that the consent signed. It's good to periodically check, especially if this is a long-term treatment facility. Make sure that the consents are still valid as you go. Know the science. And what do I mean by that? Know that the urine screens not only have been taken based on the verbal assertion of your loved one, but when and what the result was. Why is this important? Well, we found ourselves in a situation where they're alleging she missed some urine screens, which is not true. And we were able to provide evidence that she actually is clean and sober and is hitting all of her urine screens. It just wasn't documented in the chart. And it's all part around some of the problems we're facing, we're dealing with. But it was another symptom of a person in a role pretending to be a counselor that, and I'll qualify what that means in a second, that is making comment or making assertions and comments, even in a court setting, about my loved one could be happening to you as well if you're not getting results from those urine screens that you have as well. Because the last thing you want to do is find yourself in a circumstance where you've got to come back in and you're trying to defend your person and make sure that they're okay, and then have to get the treatment facility to provide all that information, because they won't. And it took weeks for us to get this treatment plan in my situation, and it finally took a real forceful conversation and a really upset counselor to get that quote unquote counselor. Know the treatment plan and commitment document. So anything that's signed up front that says, here, in this case it was there, what are your goals? And then they put their language in terms of what that objective is for that treatment plan. In this case, we had 8 goals. And so you should know what those goals are and not have to wait till you have a problem like I had to, and then try to pull teeth to get this treatment plan out. Get it up front. Make sure that they have accountability to know that and you're not the quote unquote junkie that's trying to manipulate anything. You're actually seeing it as well. And you're going to want answers too. Yes, this is work. Yes, this is work. Your loved one does not get dumped in a treatment facility. If they're truly your loved one and you're truly going to support them all the way through it, you don't just dump them in there and wait for the result. That's not how it works, especially with what we're finding out here is that in many cases, there's bad actors in these facilities, and maybe the facility themselves, just based on their policies and procedures of trying to fill beds and keep the money coming, are doing things that aren't necessarily supporting recovery in a healthy way. Make sure you know your loved one and understand have an open and honest communication. And sometimes, in our case, it was tough because for us to get to a place of truth, I had to hear some very hurtful truth. It sucked. But that suckiness made it so that when we found ourselves in a circumstance like this, we're dealing with truth. We're not dealing with anything nobody can dump some surprise on me about Sam. They just can't, because she's been forthright with some tough stuff that I don't know a lot of people that would have, but she did. And so with that, we've got a good communication. And that way I can corroborate the evidence that's coming in with the fact that she's alleging this. I have the pre-documentation to say this is what we're fighting along the line of with the treatment provider. And then with these other elements around it, I can support that, yes, she was doing what she was supposed to be doing based on the schedule that I understand to be true. Now, it's tough to keep ahead of every single detail, but what you want to do is make sure that you at least generally have a sense that you're coming alongside their treatment journey, so that if anybody internally has any other agenda in play, you can say, time out. This was not the agreement, and I have evidence of it. That way you're not going to the treatment facility and asking them to give you the evidence. You've already been holding it. Very important. Very, very important, because once you find yourself in a mess, you'll find history rewritten an awful lot, or very difficult, you have difficulties getting the documentation you need. So let's just say that you do all these things and you're all ready to go, and now all of a sudden there's a problem. Something's not going right, and your loved one's getting accused of certain things, or not getting progressed through the program, or in our case, not getting discharged in some odd sort of way. In our case, she'd been progressing, was supposed to be out on November 5th, and was progressing, doing literally everything correctly to the point they were even progressing her through the program, so she was free all the time. She was out doing her real estate stuff and coming back to the house with the kids, and just everything was really, we were really reintegrating and things were going well. And all of a sudden they yanked the rug out from underneath us, and there was a bunch of open beds, and she's got insurance that pays. I don't think that's a coincidence. And as we dig into it more, we're finding it's not. So in your situation, if you find yourself in that circumstance, or in worse, I was just talking tonight to the person I was mentioning, and her loved one was in a facility that had 46 kids go missing. 46 kids go missing that were in that facility, to the point that local law enforcement acknowledged all these kids missing, but they're just junkies in a bad way. And they're, we dismiss them all rather than question, even if they're in a bad way. That's just an extraordinary number for people to go missing in a treatment facility. So this person dug into it, found out her daughter was actually being incredibly mistreated, including some SA stuff that was going on, and a wide variety of things. And that ultimately turned into a lawsuit that was won. Don't assume that that you're not experiencing similar things. Now, that was a for-profit institution. There's a lot of other nuance with it, but in a nonprofit, while they may not be farming out children or women, the nonprofits can still do things based on any number of things. Qualified personnel are hard to come by. Many people that are coaches, recovery coaches, peers, those types of things. Well, I'm a huge peer advocate fan. I'm a massive peer advocate fan. I think it's an incredible resource for somebody that's struggling, that doesn't trust anybody with a badge of any nature whatsoever or any credential at all. A peer does a really good job of making sure they can keep somebody connected. But they've relaxed a lot of those qualifications, and you're less than I think in many cases people can do that job a year sober. Man, at a year sober, you got to be kidding me. I can barely even figure out what was going on. I was still trying to work on me. And they've got them out there being a liaison for people to get them back on better days when they're still well short of getting their stuff back together at that point anyway. So you have the personnel interacting is also something to consider, that there is going to be a varying degree of skill set, certainly very limited education requirements, and definitely a life experience that in many cases only knows the street and might not know how to create an environment where somebody can live outside the street. If you've ever been in a treatment facility, you'll find that many people that work there have had substance use history, and their whole lives have been around that. And this is their first real job that's not immersed in the drug culture. And with that, there's a lot of tendencies and behaviors that are still there. There's vendetta and things like that happen because it's just, sometimes it's in default if that's where you've lived your life. So if you start to feel that you've got something going on, you've got all these other constructs in place where you know what's going on with the program, you know what the commitments were going into it, you got reasonable assurance that your loved ones are complying with the program, and they're going to their treatment programs. Because remember, I said one very important thing: if you have somebody in a residential program, make sure that their mental health and substance use counseling and prescriber is not at the residential program. Get them into a third party to do all that and have them stay in the residential program for everything else. Now, there will be counseling and things like that and medicine provided them there, but you don't want that you don't want everything under one roof, because that's where you can get yourself in a bind. So with that, you got all these accountabilities in place. And in our case, having a third party has been tremendously valuable as we try to navigate this mess and get our family back on track here with this. But your person that's in a facility should start with their words. When you're trying to find out facts, you find out facts with, what's being said to you or what you say to others. Just subtle questions, seemingly inconsequential conversations, but with an agenda to say, I'm trying to understand what's going on. And in many cases, to help them think through the complexity, because they may be overwhelmed or depressed. In our case, it can lead to almost impairment, the depression. So you really do have to spoon feed a lot of what you're trying to deal with and help them understand how to have those conversations. But that's where it starts, is then things start to not make sense. Then ask what do they hear as they're sitting there? A lot of times when we're in recovery, we're just very narrow sighted and everything's right in front of us, but they got to open their ears a little bit and hear on what's going on around them. Are patients being treated similar to them, or are they being treated outside the norm in one way or the other? If it's more beneficial, why is that? If they're treating them way better than everybody else, why is that? What's going on here? Or if they're treating them way worse, what's going on there? And a lot of that you can understand by getting more of a peripheral view, and that you can do that through hearing. What do you see? One of the things that we found is there's in one office, there's a list of where people's phases are. And that gives you some indication if they have any intention of moving you. And you notice that other people are moving and they might be doing less or more or whatever. And you start seeing inconsistencies. Find out about their general experience. What are they experiencing while they're there? Are they able to, coexist with the other population there without any hassle? Or are they being singled out inappropriately in one way or the other? Actually, if you got a male counselor coming up and rubbing a female client's shoulders for no reason, that definitely says something's going the other way. If you've got a female counselor coming in and just crushing you for no reason at all, that could indicate something else. And so have your loved one that's in that bind, have them feel like they're contributing to their own resurrection. You can do that by having them help you find out some information, figure out what actually is going on, pressure test what they're telling you with what you know to be true about everything else, and see if it even makes sense. Sometimes it won't. Maybe sometimes they're just trying to get out of there and are making up some stuff. That happens. But if you have the context of all these other things, now it's not the junkie's word versus everybody else. You are kind of in it together and you understand the truth, and maybe you can help coach your person to be more dedicated to the program and do more for the program, even though they don't understand how it's going to play out, and encourage them to keep going. At the same time, if they find themselves in trouble, you're going to need to help them hold on until you can come help figure out how to fix this problem. And that's exactly where we are. There's a lot of red flags that come up in treatment, and not all of them really lead to egregious behavior, but there are some things that I found tonight that were very interesting that I didn't know. If there's any type of federal grants going into your facility and they're taking food stamps for food, it's fraud. As I've been coached, what you do with that is you go to a whistleblower program. If you are in a program that has a treatment plan that's out of date or it's not being used, that's a problem. Or if you have a counselor that's writing your treatment plan, they're out of class if they're not licensed. And lo and behold, we're in a situation where we have a recovery coach, which is a KSAC, they are not counselors. They're a higher level of treatment support. They're a certification. A KSAC should not be dictating whether somebody can see their children or not. They're the worker alongside the plan, not the author of the plan and not the authority behind it. And they're not a prescriber either, for that matter. They have a limited role, a valuable role if they're doing it correctly. A lot of KSACs are very instrumental in people's growth, but they're not a counselor. And they have a lot of boundaries they need to hold to. And if they're not, that's important. So that would be one of the questions you want to find out going into treatment. Who's the counselor and what is their licensing or certification? That'll start telling you what boundaries they have to behave in. So if you have a bad actor and you have somebody that's being vindictive and they're doing things from a execution of power to determine how penalties and problems are going to be solved, or being the voice of what the problem was in the first place, it's good to know if this person has a high level of licensing or if they've got a certification like a peer or a KSAC. I'm still learning. There's a lot to unpack with this whole thing. There's a lot to uncover. I've got 4 phone calls tomorrow that'll take it to the next level for what I need to do on my end. If you do find yourself in these circumstances, it's going to be very important for you. I've found from an efficiency perspective, take the time. It gets very overwhelming, all the stuff that you'll find out and the things that you're curious to figure out, is this really a problem or not? Because these are very insulated organizations, and they're also manage themselves in a gray area. As I said before, they're a non-medical facility doing medical stuff. So with that comes gray area in terms of what they can and can't do. And also beyond that, whether people are going to go after them for doing things they can't do because of limited workers and blah, 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 all the things that go on with it. But knowing a lot of information going in about who the counselor is, what their certifications are, knowing what the treatment plan is, having your loved ones set up, joint calendar meetings so you understand when their appointments are. And if they choose to do the GPS thing, like we've agreed to do for each other, that's useful so that if anybody says, well, she wasn't there, and I can say nonsense and pull up the app, it's time stamped, it's all right there. So you can absolutely help somebody stay out of Dodge if somebody's going after them. And then the third party treatment provider is absolutely a given. I hope this is helpful. It's way more frustrating than trying to find your password, as I started to talk about in the beginning of the show. Honestly, I was thinking after the second show I did on this one, you guys remember the movie Happy Gilmore and the Mr. lady? So he had dropped his mom off at a long-term care facility, and she wasn't really comfortable about being there. But the guy, Ben Stiller, I think it was, is so over the top. Oh, hi, babe, and hugging her and being all friendly and loving and everything else until Adam Sandler leaves the room. And then he's just like, get to work. And she's like, my fingers are bleeding. Get to work. And so he's, as soon as the door closes, the presentation stops and then the real abuse begins. And then as he goes out in his car, this lady was going, Mista to him, jumps out the window and lands on the hood of his car. That seemed funny then. It doesn't seem funny at all now. The last episode, actually, as I was coming on to prepare for this, I had comments on there from, I think it's two different people. It might have been the same person that talks about the loss of her son. But she had two different comments that were quite involved in terms of some of the stuff that she's faced. You can see that on the other videos if you want to see what she's talking about. But this is prevalent. That scene in that movie I used to laugh at, not laughing at it anymore, because we're actually living a very similar situation where there's antagonism, abuse, and potentially some level of racism, believe it or not. And I usually don't call that out because I think as white people, we haven't really known anything like that to the extent that it's typically framed up. But in our case, it appears to be that might be some of it. So, and it has to do with our family construct and how and who's in our family and what that looks like to certain people and their bias that they have with it. So we've felt it before, but not to the point of penalty like this. But you do have to question, and then one question you're going to ask yourself, and you should ask this before your loved one gets going: how many open beds do you have? Why is that important? Because that'll tell you how desperate they are to fill the beds and how desperate they'll be if they lose one. While it's great if you're insurable, or you can be insurable, or if you have insurance that can be paid for insurance, you can actually get into treatment. What's bad about it is that most of the population that's coming into a lot of these facilities are not insurable, and so they're not getting the beds. And if they've got open beds, you might be the one that they got to hang on to until this is all over. In our case, with other agencies involved with this because of some legal matters, they're leveraging the kick you out thing versus giving opportunities for growth and development, which I think is incredibly hypocritical considering a post they had when they even created this was talking about trauma-informed treatment. I almost laughed when I saw that, and not out of ha-ha, but just the absolute absurdity that they would lie like that. So this facility was built based on trauma-informed treatment. And yet the way somebody that had completed their program by November 5th, as stated, and then tried to be discharged on December 16th, and the counselor didn't show up, and then they started throwing out other allegations when we started to question why this was going on, started to cause problems in our legal matters, and made it so that our number one goal of reuniting our family is extremely problematic right now because of lies. And now are alleging other offenses that are supposedly you can be kicked out for, but yet, even though you can be kicked out for them and discharged immediately without a complete, they're keeping her there. That's odd to me, considering the thing that they could penalize her for to the greatest extent, they don't. They'd rather just keep her there and abuse her. If your loved one's in this stuff, I feel for you. Honestly, I feel for you. You might be tired right now. And you probably are spending a lot of conversations with your loved one, keeping them centered and on board. And I don't think under any guise, once they leave these institutions, there isn't going to be lingering effects of the abuse. It does last, especially if you're in a trauma-informed program that obviously acknowledges by admitting you to the program that you are a trauma led to a lot of what's gone on in your life. to treat somebody with the behaviors like isolation, removing progress points, antagonism, shining flashlights in your face while you're sleeping, which is actually happening. Um, those things are very traumatic for somebody that's had multiple traumatic events in your life. And by the way, it doesn't sound very trauma informed to me when somebody is a gunshot survivor, saw the father of her first child shot and killed in the street in that same shooting, and delivered her child 1 month after the shooting. It's probably not trauma informed to go in and shine a flashlight in her face while she's sleeping and rip her covers off her bed. All to put on the air that she's doing something wrong. Let's go back to the fact that every single urine screen she's had has been clean since August of last year, since she entered the first program, which has nothing to do with this. And she still to this day does. And I don't know how. I really don't. She's an impressive person to me. Guys, you're not alone if you're here. You're not alone. If you're a support and you're tired, there are resources out there that can help. You can get a hold of me at chrisandretro.com or comment on this video. I can connect you with some people that can give you some good information to move forward with whatever it is that you're facing. I'm learning every single day on this thing. I'm fully invested in it because I've got to get my loved one home, and not any more damage done, for God's sakes. So I'm getting more and more educated every single day, but I do have some resources that I'm now connected with. If you find yourself in this circumstance and need some help, like I said, comment in the video or just send me an email at chris@chrisandretro.com, and I'll do my best to reply quickly and get you some contacts of people that might be able to support you. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, comment, share. We need more numbers if you've experienced this type of thing, and so we can help each other navigate it to the point that hopefully someday there's legislation that governs these facilities like a medical institution versus being a non-medical facility doing medical things. It'll change everything, I think. I think it'll make things a lot easier. It might raise the cost of it a little bit more, but at least in where we're at, we'll have programs that are at least regulated, and this veil that they hide behind is removed. Not for the good ones, but it has to remove so the bad ones can't get away with this nonsense anymore. That ultimately leads to more trauma, more death, and more people having a hard time actually living a normal life after these types of experiences. This is permanently damaging when you go through these types of things. Permanently damaging. Above and beyond anything that you ever did to get yourself there. As I said before, just because you do something wrong that gets you in prison doesn't mean the COs can beat you to death. Just because you have substance use disorder and perhaps have done things that have violated the law and got yourself in trouble in the law outside doesn't mean that when you come to a treatment facility that says that they're a trauma-informed treatment facility, they should create more trauma. Sounds like they might be farming future patients so they can always have somebody that has insurance come back. I don't know. Maybe that's too much of a stretch because of my attitude on the whole thing, but it's really starting to really stink for me, and we're doing the work we need to take care of it. But guys, I really do appreciate you. Between now and the next time we talk, I'm going to do everything I can do to stay out of trouble, and I hope you do too.